The phone rang out of the blue. Apparently, while Otilia was in the kitchen, Angelina had tinkered with the phone and changed the ringtone, so the unfamiliar music that played instead of the usual Brahms symphony startled them both. Angelina amusingly exclaimed, "Oops," and hid under the table, realizing that she had caused something. Otilia, on the other hand, simply flinched and immediately sensed something ominous in the ringtone, something that could disrupt their orderly lives. "Hello? Hello. Is this Otilia?" "Yes. I'm Angelina's mother." It seemed for Otilia she was in some kind of the vacuum. All sounds disappeared at once, the world lost its colors, and only her daughter's frightened face lingered before her. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." "You probably dialed the wrong number." No. I was given your number by the foster care agency. I am Angelina's mother, and I want to take her back." Otilia hung up and placed the phone face down, as if the voice she had just heard could materialize and crawl out, grabbing Angelina with its tentacles to immediately take her away to a new address. No, this simply couldn't be. The phone rang again, and Otilia, picking it up with a certain repulsion as if it were some repugnant toad, hung up again and switched it off entirely. She slammed the phone onto the table too forcefully, and maybe because of that, but most likely due to sensing her unease, her daughter suddenly burst into tears and threw herself into Otilia's arms. "I won't give you away to anyone, my sweetie, to anyone in the world." Otilia held her daughter tightly and closed her eyes. She could pretend as if it hadn't happened. Right now, she would calm her daughter, take her to the kitchen for lunch, put her to sleep, and everything would be back to normal. In her mother's arms, Angelina quickly grew quiet and settled down. She was almost 3 years old, but she still didn't speak. The neurologist assured them that everything was fine, that the girl was just late in speaking and they needed to wait. And Otilia herself saw it too. Angelina was a very bright child, understanding everything, and a few words were indeed in her vocabulary. Her husband even laughed and claimed that their daughter took after him. He also started speaking at 3. In general, they behaved as if Angelina had always been with them, as if she truly was their daughter. Otilia didn't like it when things deviated from the plan, so she tried to regain control and fed her daughter chicken soup, then sang her 3 familiar lullabies until Angelina fell asleep. The phone still lay on the table with its screen turned off, and Otilia was afraid to touch it. She wasn't able to give a birth. Otilia had known this since her youth. She had a whole range of diagnoses, and the only possibility for her to have a child was through in vitro fertilization. However, due to the tumor that was removed when she was 15, any procedures involving hormonal influence were forbidden. Valentine knew about this. She had told him everything even before their wedding. She couldn't hide such an important fact, although she loved him so much that if he broke off the engagement, it seemed like she would simply die of grief. But he loved her too and accepted this fact resolutely and optimistically, immediately stating that they would adopt a child. Otilia was trying to govern her life by a strict plan, so she had everything carefully thought out. They enrolled in the foster parent school, discussed all possible issues, weighed the pros and cons of newborns and older children, and ultimately decided to search for a child with a full status under a year old, either a newborn or one taken from a family. Otilia had read about attachment disorders in foster children and wanted a child who had spent a short time in the system. And then the unexpected happened. As she scrolled through the photos of children, she dismissed those who didn't fit the age or status criteria. But as soon as she saw Angelina's photo, her heart started racing. Otilia immediately knew that this was her child. She was ready to jump up and go get her right away, fearing that she wouldn't make it in time. It didn't matter that Angelina was already 1.5 years old, 8 months of which she had spent in the orphanage. Suddenly, none of that mattered to Otilia. Even the fact that Valentine didn't support her didn't play any role either. He continued to insist on adopting a toddler, and this girl scared him even more because her mother had a history of substance abuse. Otilia, just think about the potential consequences. It says here that she has developmental delays. We wanted a healthy child without any issues, Valentine argued. All these arguments seemed empty and ridiculous to her. For the first time in her life, she acted against reason and plans, following the dictates of her heart. And she never regretted it. They took Angelina under their custody, and everything went fairly smoothly and quickly. Valentine insisted on custody, even though they had initially planned to adopt a child. "I will never give her back under any circumstances," Otilia declared to him when he mentioned it. "I didn't mean that," Valentine defended himself. "But since the child is not easy and we are facing job cuts, who knows? The custody payments wouldn't hurt, and she probably needs swimming lessons, a special education teacher, and so on." Reluctantly, Otilia agreed, promising that as soon as he resolved their financial problems, they would adopt the girl right away. So it was Valentine's fault for everything. Otilia knew she couldn't say anything in front of their daughter, so she had to pretend that everything was fine until they went through their evening rituals and the girl fell asleep. That's when she would express her feelings to her husband. But things didn't turn out as planned. Why didn't she think of it herself? As if the phone could only belong to her. She realized it from Valentine's eyes. She had called him too. Her husband kissed Otilia, picked up their daughter, and cheerfully asked about his princess's day. Otilia replied with the same fake cheerfulness, saying that everything was good, and served dinner for everyone. "So, she called you too, right?" Otilia asked softly. Valentine nodded. "What did she say?" "Probably the same as she told you," he guessed. "I didn't talk to her. I hung up," Otilia confessed. "Why?" her husband asked, surprised. "I couldn't bear to hear it." Otilia raised her voice slightly more than necessary, and he put a finger to his lips, indicating the room. "Don't you think that's childish? Besides, we'll definitely lose our daughter if we don't know her plans. I won't give Angelina to anyone." Otilia clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. She didn't feel the pain. She was ready to kill for her daughter right now, without hesitation or doubt. "What did she say to you?" Otilia repeated. "She said she was released early, got her life back on track, and wants to take Angelina home." "She has no parental rights," Otilia hissed. "No one will give her the child." Valentine sighed. "She intends to regain her rights." Otilia couldn't hold back any longer and whispered, shouted, "It's your fault. You didn't agree to adopt Angelina. And now they're going to take her away from us." Of course, Otilia immediately went to the best lawyer. She couldn't take any risks and wanted to start the adoption process right away, faster than the woman could regain her rights. But first, Otilia rushed to the guardianship office, panicking and trembling with indignation. "You said there was no chance that the mother would claim rights to Angelina," she said in a cold tone, struggling not to shout. "And why didn't anyone inform me that she was released?" They managed to calm her down, assuring her that the woman had no chances and that they themselves knew nothing about her release. They promised to provide all possible support to assist in the adoption procedure if Otilia took it upon herself. One of the employees reminded her with reproach, "I warned you that custody is a risk." But another one immediately interrupted and declared, "Who would give a child to a drug addict? She'll cause trouble again and go back to where she was. Relax, everything will be fine." Otilia reasoned that she couldn't rely on their opinion. That's why she went to the lawyer, thoroughly researching all the available reviews online. The lawyer's name was Rafael Santos. He looked about 35, which inspired confidence. He had already gained experience and was still young and energetic enough to act decisively and efficiently. Moreover, he had almost no losing cases to his name, which more than compensated for the seemingly insurmountable fee he mentioned in his response letter for their family. For now, Otilia made an advance payment, and then she would figure out the rest somehow. Rafael immediately started preparing the documents, warning that if the woman didn't back down, they would have to sue for Angelina. The atmosphere in the house was so tense that the daughter couldn't help but feel it. That's probably why she had been sleeping poorly and acting out in the past few days, and Otilia struggled to hold herself together, fighting back tears of exhaustion and helplessness. She felt the same way over a year ago during the adaptation period. Angelina was inconsistent then too, refusing to follow the routine that Otilia considered essential. If Angelina skipped her nap or refused to eat, Otilia would panic. Now she was more relaxed about it all, but still on edge. Today, Angelina had a good lunch and fell asleep almost on time, so it could be considered a successful day. The lawyer had also written, stating that everything was ready from his side, and they only needed some documents that Otilia and Valentine were already arranging, so they could submit the paperwork to the court. But that was where the good news of the day ended. Otilia's phone vibrated, which she always put on silent mode while her daughter slept. Since that day, the woman hadn't called once, but Otilia still panicked at every unknown caller. She glanced at the phone and relievedly realized it was her mother, took the phone, and tiptoed out of the room. "Yes?" Otilia asked irritably. How many times had she asked her mother not to call during Angelina's nap time? But her mother was always indifferent to the schedule. "Otilia, we have a problem. No one has been able to reach your father for 3 days. He hasn't shown up for work either. Could you go check on him?" For a moment, Otilia felt like a little girl again, lying in bed and listening. Would the key turn in the lock? Would footsteps be heard on the stairs? As long as she could remember, her father had always been a drunkard, and her childhood was like a roller coaster ride, never knowing what would happen next. In Otilia's adult life, everything was planned with manic precision. "Fine," Otilia agreed. "Valentine will be back home, and I'll go. Call me as soon as possible, all right? I have a bad feeling about it." "Mom, please. Everything is fine with him, he's just drinking somewhere as usual. But I'll check." Her parents had divorced when she finished school, and her mother had said she would endure until Otilia grew up. And why, one might ask? They would have lived much better without him. The rest of the day, Otilia was on edge, although she was confident that nothing serious had happened to her father. When Valentine arrived, she left him with Angelina and hurried to her father's place, fortunately not far away. She had a spare key to his apartment, just in case. As she approached the door, she sensed an unpleasant smell. It was always like this when her father was drinking, but it was still scary, causing her fingers to tremble, making it difficult to insert the key into the lock. When she finally opened the door, her eyes immediately caught sight of empty bottles, overflowing bags of rotten garbage, and scattered belongings and clothes. Trying not to get involved in anything, she walked into the room. Her father lay on the couch, dressed in his outdoor jacket and shoes. Otilia cautiously touched him. He was alive. She let out a sigh of relief. Regardless of his condition, he was still her father. She took off his shoes, opened the window to let in fresh air, collected the garbage in bags. She also checked all the hiding places and poured the contents down the sink. She didn't bother waking him up, making 2 trips to take out the trash, closing the window, and heading home. She glanced at the clock. It was time for Angelina to sleep, so she should call Valentine to remind him. But if he was currently reading her a bedtime story, the call might distract the little girl, and putting her to bed a second time would be difficult. Approaching the entrance, Otilia encountered a woman who seemed very strange to her. The woman stood, tilting her head up, and looked at their window. Otilia's heart started racing, and she hurried past, not slowing her pace, while trying to memorize how this woman looked as best she could. Tall, with shoulder-length chestnut hair, wearing a light gray coat unsuitable for the weather. The woman's eyes gleamed feverishly, and Otilia suddenly thought with a sense of satisfaction, she's back to her old ways. In that case, nobody will give her Angelina. Otilia even felt a bit cheerful and fluttered into the entrance, but then another thought struck her. Yes, the court might leave the girl with them, but that woman could still kidnap her. She felt a chill down her spine. Otilia quickened her pace to reach home as soon as possible and nestle against her daughter's warm head, making sure everything was fine. Valentine was a great father, and of course, he had already put Angelina to bed. He met her at the threshold and helped her take off her coat. "So, how is it there?" "It's fine. He's sleeping. It's such a mess, though." "How's Angelina?" "She's also sleeping and has made a mess," Valentine attempted to joke. Otilia took off her shoes and sat on a small table in the hallway. "Valentine, I think that woman is standing outside the window." He looked at his wife in bewilderment, as if not understanding who she was talking about. "The one who wants to take Angelina." Valentine shrugged. "Maybe you imagined it." "I didn't imagine it." Otilia began to get angry with her husband. Why couldn't he understand that all this was serious? "I'll go and have a look." He went to the kitchen, and Otilia followed him. They cautiously pulled aside the curtain. There was absolutely no one downstairs. "You see, there's no one. You're just tired," he said. But Otilia was sure she hadn't been mistaken. That woman wouldn't leave them alone. Valentine fell asleep almost immediately. While she tossed and turned all night, they needed to do something, come up with a solution. Yes, she had already found a lawyer, but what could he do, especially if that woman decided to kidnap Angelina? Maybe report it to the police? But what would she tell them? A suspicious woman stood by the entrance and looked into the window. They would just laugh at her. No, that wasn't an option. The solution that came to her in the early morning turned out to be very simple, and she couldn't understand why she didn't think about it earlier. She needed to hire a private detective who would find out everything about that woman and keep tabs on her. The only thing left was to find the money for it. She had some savings, but they were supposed to go to the lawyer. "This is too much, Otilia," Valentine declared when she told him about her idea in the morning. "What can a detective do to help in this situation? It's a bit too much. And besides, where will we get the money for a private detective? I've already told you, these aren't the best times for me." "I'll handle the money issue myself," Otilia insisted. "Let him at least keep an eye on our house." Valentine stood up, forcefully pushing his chair back, causing its legs to clatter on the hard tile floor. "I need to go to work. And keep in mind, I'm against it," he said. Otilia was puzzled. What was he so afraid of? She had clearly stated that she would take care of the financial aspect herself. And she already knew where to get the money. Otilia had only one thing that was dear to her, a golden cross with diamonds, an antique piece of jewelry she inherited from her grandmother. This cross was associated with a particular story. Currently, she kept it in a special safe deposit box at the bank, but back then, it used to be at home on the top shelf of a wardrobe. How fortunate it was that her mother regularly checked on it. During one of these checks, the case turned out to be empty. It was a shock for both her mother and Otilia. They didn't have to think long about where the cross had gone. They immediately went to wake up their father, who had just returned from another drinking spree. He quickly confessed that he had pawned the cross, and Otilia's mother had to borrow money from all their acquaintances to redeem it. If her mother found out that Otilia was resorting to the same tactics as her father, she wouldn't forgive her. But Otilia had no other option. They already had a car on credit, a credit card that had passed its grace period. This cross held sentimental value for her as a memory of her grandmother, but she was willing to do anything for Angelina. "Forgive me, Grandma Angelina," she whispered. "She's even named after you." Otilia had one acquaintance, a jeweler, who had long been willing to buy the cross from her. However, she still tried to keep a small chance of getting it back for herself. To do that, she had to tell him the whole truth. "Sergio, I need to save my little girl. I'm begging you, don't sell the cross for 3 months. I'll try to find the money. If I can't, you can sell it. I'm ready to do anything. I'll pay more than you ask. Just wait." "Well, all right, Otilia. We're not strangers. Let's make it a written agreement. You return the money or the cross in 3 months. Deal?" Hiding the envelope with the money in her bag, Otilia hurried home. She had left Angelina with their neighbor Luz and was extremely anxious, fearing that something might happen. But her daughter was fine. She calmly looked at the pictures in a new book that Otilia had gotten for this occasion. "Thank you, Luz, you saved me. Did anyone come by?" "Who could come by?" The neighbor wondered. "You seem nervous. Did something happen?" But Otilia didn't explain anything, making an excuse about waiting for a courier to deliver a birthday gift for her daughter. In reality, she was expecting one visitor today, a private detective she had found on the internet, who was supposed to come to her house a bit later. They had agreed to meet during Angelina's nap time to discuss everything calmly. Otilia was incredibly nervous. She had only seen private detectives in movies before and had no idea how to behave with one. And most importantly, she didn't know if he would be able to help her. The detective was so stereotypical that Otilia even doubted his effectiveness. Tall, in a long gray coat and a hat pulled down over his eyes, with intelligent green eyes and a slightly stern, penetrating face. Miguel, he introduced himself, although Otilia already knew his name. "Otilia, let's go to the kitchen." There she thoroughly and in detail told Miguel the whole story, starting from the adoption of Angelina and ending with the phone call from that woman. He recorded everything on a recorder and also took handwritten notes. Otilia liked his attitude towards his job. "You didn't tell me her name," he reminded her when they had almost discussed everything. It was difficult for Otilia to say that name out loud, but she managed to do it. "Her name is Antonia Vasquez. Here are all the details I have." Otilia took out a white envelope from the book where she had previously placed the printed page. "I need to find out everything about her, who she is friends with, what she does, where she lives. And also, I kindly ask you to call me only in extreme cases. Send information by message or email." It seemed that this request did not surprise Miguel at all. He took a prepayment for his services and left her apartment as inconspicuously as he had appeared in it. Otilia felt slightly relieved. She entered the room, quietly sat down next to Angelina's bed, and stared at her sleeping face for a long time. She seemed so peaceful, so fragile, like the first spring butterfly that landed to bask in the timid rays of April's sun. It felt like a sudden cool wind could come and she would flutter away, disappearing into the heights, leaving only a vague shadow behind. From the very first day, Angelina was afraid of losing her daughter. She had prepared herself for so long to believe that she would never be a mother, so she couldn't simply trust in her happiness. Moreover, Angelina was a wonderful child. Contrary to all fears, maternal prophecies, and Valentine's doubts, the girl quickly integrated into their family as if she had always been a part of it. She even inherited traits from her adoptive parents. She laughed like Valentine, furrowed her brow when she was focused, just like Otilia did. No, she couldn't lose her. They couldn't. This conversation started with Otilia, as often happened lately, blaming Valentine for everything, accusing him of not allowing the adoption to be done in time. But the truth was that the lawyer informed Otilia that Antonia had filed for the restoration of her maternal rights, so the adoption could not be completed at the moment. The Child Protection Agency was already aware of everything, and they had to wait for a decision. Cold horror struck Otilia. What if the court decided to return Angelina to that woman? And whom else could she blame if not her husband? "How much longer can you go on like this?" he asked. "Are you going to blame me forever?" "Well, what do you suggest I do? Can you even imagine what this could turn into? What conditions Angelina might end up in? This woman is a monster." "How do you know that?" "You haven't even talked to her once. She is actually Angelina's mother. Have you ever thought about that?" Otilia almost choked with indignation. "The mother? Do you even understand what you're saying? She's a criminal and a drug addict. She never once showed any interest in how Angelina is doing. Who would have told her? She's been stripped of her parental rights." Otilia felt the urge to throw something heavy at her husband. She held back, but she couldn't talk to him anymore. Otilia stood up and said, "I still won't give Angelina to anyone." After that, she went to sleep, leaving him alone. But sleep wouldn't come, anxious thoughts wouldn't leave her. And why hadn't the detective informed her of anything yet, despite her paying him? In the morning, she didn't talk to her husband, didn't even have breakfast with him. When he left, she picked up Angelina, and the day seemed to start off well. Despite the evening conversation, her mood had slightly improved. The detective wrote that there was news and that it would be better if they met. He couldn't make it for lunch and suggested 5 in the evening. Although it disrupted her plans, it promised news, and apparently serious news, since he suggested a meeting. Otilia called her mother and asked her to come. The neighbors weren't home, and she couldn't bring her daughter to the meeting. She didn't like leaving Angelina with her mother. She never followed a routine, but there was no other choice. Look at this real beauty. And what a beautiful dress. Her mother cooed from the doorway. Mom, how many times do I have to ask you not to speak like that? She'll start talking like you herself. Oopsie whoopsie, we have such a strict mommy, don't we, Angelina? She seemed not to hear Otilia. And do you know what Grandma's brought you? Let's have a look. Of course, she brought chocolate. And Angelina has a diathesis, she should remember that. Mom, she can't have it. Otilia whispered. Angelina, let's go show Grandma the new book. No, it's just unbearable. Otilia's entire childhood was like this. Her mother fed her chocolate candies, after which, of course, Otilia wouldn't eat lunch. And now she has chronic gastritis because of it. If I don't return by 6, there's soup in the fridge. Warm it up for a minute and a half. Take this orange plate. The spoon. Otilia, do you think I won't be able to feed a child? After all, I raised you somehow. She could have told her mother's yes, somehow. But that would have been too much. The detective scheduled their meeting at a cafe. Otilia didn't want to have a conversation in front of strangers, but it was too cold outside. October was coming to an end, and snow was about to fall. By the way, he chose an excellent cafe. It wasn't crowded, the tables were spaced far apart, so they could talk in peace. Hello again. I apologize for dragging you out at such an inconvenient time. I just wanted to deliver the gathered information as quickly as possible, thought it was important to you. I don't have any other time today. Can I order something for you? He cared so much that it immediately put Otilia on guard. I'll have a cup of green tea, thank you. Miguel beckoned the waiter and ordered a cup of coffee and green tea. Let's get started right away. I understand that you're in a hurry. So, I found out the following about Antonia. She grew up in the capital city in a foster family, and there is no information about her biological parents. In the capital? Otilia exclaimed in surprise. Yes, why? My husband is from the capital. Never mind, continue. Miguel coughed and took out some papers from his folder. She was a troubled child in school and was registered with Commission for Underage Children's Affairs. She left school in high school and started working at a pizzeria. After that, her trail goes cold, and there is only information related to the crime, but you already know that, right? Just in case, I wrote it down here. He pointed to the papers in the folder. Take a look later. Interestingly, as you know, she was accused of murder and drug possession. And she was released early, much earlier. You can't approximate her behavior here. I did some inquiries. It turns out that the person they thought was dead is alive and well. He was detained somewhere at the border, some shady story. And accordingly, she was released because there was no murder. As I understand it, Otilia said grimly, this is bad news for me. Miguel shrugged. Well, considering what you told me, probably. But that doesn't absolve her of other charges, so. Well, it's not for me to judge. Let's continue. At the moment, Antonia has found a job and rented a place to live. And as you already mentioned, she has applied to restore parental rights. Besides that, she regularly appears near your house. Here, I took some photos. There are dates and times. He handed her the pictures. Yes, it was indeed the same woman she had encountered that time. Otilia looked at her and shuddered with horror. What was she doing, observing Angelina? Hoping to seize the moment and take her away? What if she rang the doorbell right now? Would her mother realize not to let her in? Otilia felt an immediate urge to run home, but she suspected that this wasn't all. The detective looked too grim. Is there something else? She asked directly. Yes. On one of the days when I was following her, she met with one of your acquaintances at a cafe. An acquaintance? Otilia didn't understand. She couldn't even come close to guessing who it could be. The detective silently handed her the photos. Otilia took them in her hands, mentally preparing herself for the worst. But she couldn't have imagined this. Sitting at the table next to that woman was her husband. Antonia took a whole hour to gather her thoughts. She didn't know what to say, how to behave. She prepared a whole speech, but when she finally made up her mind and dialed the number, all she managed to squeeze out was, "I'm Angelina's mother." There was such a long silence on the other end of the line that Antonia even thought the call had dropped. "Can you hear me?" she asked. The woman on the other end of the line mumbled, "You must have dialed the wrong number." Antonia hurriedly spoke. No. I was given your number by the foster care agency. I'm Angelina's mother, and I want to take her back." There were short beeps on the line. Did the call get disconnected? Antonia dialed the number again. The phone wasn't answered for a while, and then the call was dropped. She dialed again, but the number was no longer available. Antonia began scolding herself. She had prepared a speech, but she clearly said the wrong things. How foolish she was. Well, no worries, she had a second number. She would call Otilia's husband now. His name was Valentine, right? Antonia decided not to waste any time and dialed the second number. It wasn't answered immediately, so she even thought that Otilia had managed to warn her husband. But then he answered. "Yes, I'm listening." "Valentine? Hello. I need to talk to you." "I'm sorry, I don't think you introduced yourself." "Oh, yes, I'm sorry. My name is Antonia. I'm Angelina's mother." "Who is Angelina?" She was even taken aback. Maybe she really called the wrong person this time? "Aren't you Valentine? Did I get it wrong? I mean your foster daughter." Antonia expected anything but this response. "I'm sorry, have we met before? Your voice and the way you speak." Antonia froze for a moment. In fact, his voice also seemed familiar to her. But how could that be? She came to this city only because of Angelina. There couldn't be any acquaintances here. "I don't know," she honestly admitted. "In any case, what does it matter? I want to know about Angelina. How is she? I understand that you're her foster parents, but she's still my daughter. I want to take her back." Once again, he shrugged. Valentine remained silent for a moment and then suddenly suggested, "Let's meet and talk. Can you come to the city center now? I'm at work and can't leave, but if you come." Of course, Antonia was delighted. "Tell me the address." On the way, she was nervous, thinking about how to behave and what to say. She was a mother, they should understand her. Yes, they took Angelina into their custody and became attached to her over the year, but she mentioned the surname of Valentine to the security guard, and as she got into the elevator, she realized where she had heard that voice before. So she wasn't surprised when he, upon glancing at her, walked towards her and hesitantly asked, "Antonia?" They had been classmates for half a year. Antonia vaguely remembered him. She hardly interacted with anyone back then. That year, she rarely attended school or stayed at home, spending most of her time with Eugenio. But there was one incident when they were taking physical education tests. She fell and twisted her ankle, and it was Valentine who took her to the nurse and then escorted her home. Hi, hope warmed her heart, hoping that they could still fix things. "I didn't expect to meet you here." "Neither did I. Come in, have a seat." He pulled out a chair for her and sat back down at his desk. Antonia didn't know where to start the conversation, but Valentine took the initiative. So it's true Angelina is your daughter? Yes. Well, what a coincidence. You changed your last name, right? It never even crossed my mind. But, Antonia, how is this possible? Is it all true? I'm sorry, I jumped to conclusions. I'm sorry. And you haven't changed at all, still as beautiful as ever. He spoke incoherently, blushing, nervously rearranging items on the table. Antonia couldn't understand how to behave. If you're referring to prison, yes, I was there. But I didn't kill anyone, and I didn't abandon Angelina. They took her away when they started the case. I was deprived of my rights, but I'm not guilty. Now I want her back. Valentine lowered his gaze and sighed. We can't do it. She's our daughter, you understand? I don't understand, Antonia objected and even became angry. I carried her for 9 months, I heard her first cry, I held her to my chest. You can't understand that. And why do you want someone else's child? Why don't you want to have your own? Otilia can't have children. He said it with such bitterness that Antonia immediately understood it was a long-standing and painful issue. She decided not to touch on that topic. Can I at least see her? She asked quietly. Please. Antonia, you have to understand, if it were up to me, but Otilia. She would never agree to that. Despair flickered in Antonia's eyes, and Valentine seemed to soften. I'll try to make up with something. Antonia didn't have much hope that she would be allowed to see Angelina, even though Valentine promised to come up with something. They had a decent conversation, and it seemed like he understood her and sympathized, although he repeated several times that it was simply impossible to return Angelina to her. She herself understood that it wouldn't be easy. She didn't have money for an expensive lawyer, but Antonia got lucky. She found an attorney who consulted her for free on what to do to try to regain custody of her daughter. This lawyer was recommended to her by a social worker. In general, everyone was helping Antonia a lot. She couldn't understand why when all of this happened to her, no one lifted a finger. On the contrary, everyone happily confirmed how troubled she was. But now, when it turned out that she had been wrongly convicted, everyone felt obliged to help her. If only someone had helped back then. Antonia tried not to dwell on that. The past couldn't be changed. But she could make sure that nothing like this ever happened to her daughter. After all, she herself grew up in a foster family, so she knew what it was like. Her parents loved her but never accepted her. Whatever she did, they attributed it to her bad genetics. No, they didn't blame her, it was obvious. They used it the other way. Don't scold her, she's not at fault, it's the genetic. What do you expect from her? It's all genetic. Gradually, Antonia herself began to believe that she couldn't do anything, that she was just a programmed robot executing the code embedded in her. So she stopped doing her homework, skipped school, and spent all her time with Eugenio. He was the only one who understood her and accepted her for who she was. It was all because of Eugenio. They were already living together then, and Antonia knew about all his shady dealings, but she didn't care. What difference did it make how he earned money? At that time, her priority was her little girl. Eugenio and Antonia never expected to become parents, and at first, they were very scared. But the next day, Eugenio asked her to marry him and said he would be the best father in the world. He didn't become the best father. Right after Angelina was born, he started having problems. He made Antonia hide his packages in the baby's blanket and hand them over to various suspicious individuals. And then he was killed. And the apartment was set on fire. Antonia woke up to her daughter's scream. She couldn't understand what was happening. Smoke was everywhere, and there was a fire in the next room. She grabbed Angelina, managed to put on her sneakers, and took a jacket with their documents. That's why she was later accused. They claimed she had planned it all, cold-bloodedly set the apartment on fire and left. And her foster parents. She ran to them, afraid to call the fire department and the police, noticed blood in the hallway. But, of course, they soon arrived. And they said their usual words, "It's the genetic." And when Angelina was taken away, they refused to formalize custody. They didn't want to step on any landmines. When she was released, she didn't go to them. She couldn't forgive them, even though her mother wrote to her all the time and sent packages. If it weren't for them, everything could have been different. And if it weren't for Eugenio. Antonia still didn't fully know what had happened back then. It seemed that he was trying to disappear and fake the murder and fire himself. Whom he had substituted himself with, Antonia didn't know and didn't want to know. What interested her much more was the fact that officially he is Angelina's father. He had been considered dead before, but he was alive, and unlike Antonia, he hadn't been deprived of his parental rights yet. And that could be used in the fight for her daughter. And she didn't tell Valentine about it. And he called her a few days later. Well, not really. He had written to her several times, sent photos of Antonia, told about her, even sent a video. But he wrote about a meeting being impossible. But then he suddenly called and said, "You can come, but just for 5 minutes, no more. And hurry, Otilia will be back soon." Antonia didn't have time for anything, not to freshen up, not to get ready, not to buy something as a gift for her daughter. Although it was unlikely that Valentine would allow any physical reminders of her presence. It couldn't be put into words how nervous she was. Could she really see her daughter? Valentine opened the door, holding Angelina in his arms. She looked serious and slightly wary. "Look, Aunt Antonia came to visit us," he said, addressing the girl, and those words stabbed Antonia painfully. She wasn't an aunt, she was Angelina's mother. She wanted to pick up her daughter and run away from there. But she knew she couldn't. 10 minutes passed like a single moment. Maybe it was Antonia's imagination, but she wanted to believe that the girl recognized her scent or voice. In any case, she stopped being afraid of her literally within a couple of minutes, brought a book and started showing something there with her tiny finger. "Will Otilia say anything?" she quietly asked Valentine. "Oh, Angelina doesn't speak yet, don't worry," he explained. "But it's better not to take any risks. I don't know when she'll be back." Antonia left with tears in her eyes. Valentine noticed it and took her hand. "Maybe we shouldn't have done this?" he asked. "It's okay. Thank you, it meant a lot to me." Afterward, Antonia stood and stared at the window of the apartment where her daughter lived. She stood there for too long, so she collided with Otilia, who was returning home. And it seemed like she recognized her. Otilia called Valentine and asked him to come to a cafe instead of going home. It was good that she had called her mother instead of leaving the girl with the neighbor. She informed her mother that she would be late, settled the bill with the detective, and began to wait for her husband. She was boiling inwardly, but she tried to keep herself together. It was unknown what this woman had planned and what she had told Valentine. It needed to be found out. And for that, a clear mind was necessary. Valentine arrived quickly, and from her voice, he could tell that something was wrong. He practically rushed into the cafe, looking around anxiously to find Otilia with his eyes. She saw him immediately and gathered her thoughts. "What happened, Otilia?" He sat down on the chair opposite her. It was good that she had time to prepare. "Why did you meet her?" she asked, looking him straight in the eyes, leaving no time for any maneuver. Otilia thought he would deny it, so she was already prepared to take out the photos from her purse. But surprisingly, he immediately gave in. "I wanted to tell you, I just didn't know how. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Unwilling to accept that, Otilia raised her voice. "Is that all you can say? I'll explain everything now. Antonia is my classmate. It's such a strange coincidence. I only found out about it now when she called. Well, remember that day, when it happened to you too? And you're telling me about this now? I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. You're so emotional. I just meant well. I wanted to talk to her, to explain everything. I understand it's hard for you to admit, but Antonia is Angelina's mother. Just think about what she must be feeling. And what about what I'm feeling? Don't you care? Otilia shouted. What's the point of explaining anything to her? She's a drug addict. And she wants to take our daughter away. That's not true, Valentine said gently, attempting to take Otilia's hand, but she pulled her hand away, so that the cup of unfinished tea fell. Valentine grabbed some napkins and started wiping the table. I want to know what you told her. And I demand that you never see her again. Suddenly, a thought came to Otilia's mind, and she started searching something. Where's your phone? She asked. What? Don't pretend you don't understand me. I'm asking where your phone is. Give it to me now. Why? Valentine suddenly became cautious. I want to check how many times she called you and when. Otilia reached out her hand, not even considering that Valentine might refuse. Stop it, it's low. If you don't give me your phone right now, you can pack your things and leave. Valentine was momentarily stunned, as if Otilia had struck him. Do you understand what you're saying? He asked slowly. And do you understand what you're doing? You're helping that monster take away our daughter. Antonia is not a monster, Valentine said wearily. And, in general, I don't recognize you. What's happening to you? You only think about yourself. Oh, really? Am I the only one who's thinking about myself? Otilia took out the pictures from her bag and threw them on the table. You must have been thinking about me when you were meeting with this. Valentine took the pictures in his hands and examined them carefully. Where did you get these? From a private detective. And where did you get the money for his services? Otilia didn't say anything. You know what? I'm leaving. You've completely lost it with this whole story. I'm tired of this kind of life. Everything has to revolve around your stupid rules, everything on a strict schedule. I've had enough. I just want to live honestly and conscientiously. I love Angelina too, and that's why I believe that she'll be better off with her biological mother in any case. Otilia didn't recognize her husband. What had this woman done to him? Maybe she drugged him with something? Managed to get him hooked on something. If you leave now, Otilia said calmly and firmly, there will be no way back. I will never want you back. She looked her husband straight in the eyes, expecting him to give in now, to apologize, to reconcile, and everything would be fine. But Valentine stood up and walked away without looking at her. Otilia sat there for a long time, waiting for him to return, but it never happened. Otilia couldn't remember how she made it home. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her carefully constructed life was collapsing before her eyes. And she had no idea what to do now. When she entered the apartment, she immediately heard the sounds from the cartoon movie clearly. Her mother again turned on the TV for Angelina again. On any other day, she would have been upset, but not today. Today she didn't have the strength for it. What happened? Her mother approached her and looked at her attentively with her perceptive gaze, from which there was no hiding. Otilia sank onto the stool. Mom, everything is so terrible. Tears streamed down Otilia's eyes. I didn't tell you, but this woman who gave birth to Angelina wants to take her away. She filed a lawsuit to regain her maternal rights. And Valentine is even helping her. What do you mean? How is he helping her? I mean it. I hired a private detective, and today he showed me photos of Valentine with this. And the worst part is, he doesn't deny anything. She turned out to be his classmate, of all things. It's like a horrible nightmare. Wait, I don't understand anything. What detective? You need a lawyer here, a good one. Yes, I hired a lawyer too, Otilia interrupted. But the lawyer can only help in court and with the adoption process, but I needed to know what this woman had planned. And now I know. Her mother frowned. And where did you get the money? You borrowed money from me and still haven't returned it, but you have money for a detective. Otilia lowered her gaze, remembering the cross. Her mother instantly understood everything. Otilia, she said in a weak voice. Did you really sell the cross? I didn't sell it, Mom. I pawned it. I will find the money, I promise. Her mother looked at her bewildered and somewhat pitifully. But I put so much effort to redeem it. Otilia, it's a family heirloom, how could you? She rubbed her forehead as if she had a headache. Then she started getting dressed. Where are you going? Otilia protested. Home. Wait, but what about? Mom, Valentine left me. Otilia hoped that her mother would stop, understand how difficult it was for her, and comfort her. But she only paused for a few seconds and continued getting ready. Already wearing her shoes, she peeked into the living room, said goodbye to Angelina in silence, and left the apartment. Even her mother betrayed her. What a streak of bad luck. Why did everyone turn away from her in this difficult time? Well, at least she still had her daughter. And Otilia would do everything to prevent anyone from taking her away. Otilia entered the room and picked up her daughter. They spent time together till the evening, without any routine or rules. Then she put Angelina to bed and sat in the kitchen. She couldn't calm down. Could Valentine really just leave like that and abandon her in such a difficult time? It was all her fault, Otilia was sure of it. Closer to midnight, the key turned in the lock. So, he regretted it. She stepped into the hallway and immediately realized Valentine was drunk. She wouldn't mistake that smell for anything else. It was with her entire childhood. How she hated him. What's this? She asked contemptuously. Did you decide to get drunk on top of everything? Valentine put his finger to his lips. SHH, he said. You'll wake up our daughter. Ah, so you remembered that you have a daughter. Otilia, please. You know I love you and love Angelina, and everything I do it for both of you. Are you also seeing this criminal for the sake of us? He didn't answer anything, and Otilia took it as a good sign. Maybe he truly regretted it. Promise me you won't interact with her anymore? She asked, realizing that she was showing weakness, but she couldn't stay alone tonight. I won't, Valentine repeated after her. Well, unless there will be no reason for it, you know I won't be able to avoid talking to her if she comes here. I'll make sure she's not here, Otilia said. Our lawyer and I have a plan, and trust me, we have much better chances than this. She stepped back, signaling for Valentine to pass. He struggled to take off his shoes and jacket, and then went into the bathroom. Well, Valentine is still on her side. And that's good. Otilia waited for him to lie down and sleep, then took his phone. She carefully examined his messages and calls, but didn't find anything suspicious except for the first call and another one, apparently when she had arranged to meet him. Well, maybe things weren't as bad as she thought. Antonia didn't know what to do with this situation. Somehow, they had started talking to Valentine, initially about Angelina, but then he began asking questions about her, and unexpectedly, Antonia found herself answering. She told him about her parents, about this inexplicable self-destructive urge. Yes, she didn't kill Eugenio, that's clear now to everyone. But everything else was true. She dropped out of school, developed an early dependence on alcohol, and never objected to how Eugenio made money. It was embarrassing for her to tell Valentine about it, but for some reason, she couldn't lie to him or keep silent. For the first time in many years, someone genuinely took an interest in her life. Actually, Valentine was on the other side. He wasn't her friend, he was her enemy. Well, not exactly an enemy, that's too strong a word for it. Nevertheless, he didn't entertain the thought of Angelina being returned to Antonia. On the contrary, he emphasized every time that he and Otilia were wonderful parents for Angelina, and that she would be happy with them. Antonia herself started to believe it. What could she offer her daughter? A rented apartment? A father who would be in prison for a long time. She didn't even have relatives or friends who would help her in case of anything. Angelina wouldn't have grandparents. Eugenio only had a stepmother, and her foster parents knew nothing about Antonia, let alone little Angelina. But there was one thing. Antonia remembered seeing the positive pregnancy test and crying out of fear. She remembered feeling the baby's movements for the first time, which grew stronger with each passing day. And, of course, the moment she first saw her daughter, could anything in this world compare to the miracle of birth? No, no one would ever love Angelina as much as Antonia did. She was ready to do anything to make her daughter happy. And she would fight. That's why she went to Eugenio. Arranging a meeting with him wasn't difficult. Officially, she was still his wife. Antonia hadn't seen him for so long that his face had faded from her memory. She used to love him very much. But not anymore. "Well, hello," he rasped. "I didn't think you'd come." Antonia looked at him straight in the eyes. He was thin, somewhat hunched over. And there was an unfamiliar scar on his face. "Hello. Despite everything, I'm glad you're alive." Eugenio grimaced. "Well, sorry, I didn't have any other choice. And besides, how was I supposed to know it would turn out like this? You could have come when you found out what I was accused of." Unwillingly, Antonia raised her voice but quickly calmed down. "Okay, that's not why I'm here. Don't you want to know about your daughter?" "Daughter? Well, probably with your parents." "No," Antonia replied firmly. "She was placed in the foster care of another family. And they want to adopt her. But you've been released, haven't you? Can't you take her back?" "No, because I've been deprived of parental rights, thanks to you." "Well, I already apologized." Antonia took a deep breath, then exhaled. "That's not why she came here." "Fine. Eugenio, I need your help. You have to lay claim to our daughter." "Are you kidding?" He smirked. "After the trial, they'll put me behind bars." "I'm not saying they'll give her to you," Antonia interrupted. "The main thing now is to prevent them from adopting her, to gain some time. I'll try to regain my rights. But I need time, you understand? And your help." Eugenio paused, then said uncertainly, "Baby, but how can I do that when I'm locked up? A lawyer will help. I'll handle everything myself." "Well, okay, if that's the case. I'll do as you say." Antonia exhaled. "Thank you. How is she?" He quickly glanced at Antonia, then lowered his gaze. Perhaps he was truly embarrassed. "I don't know. I've only seen her once since I got released. They won't let me meet her. But I have her photos. Do you want to see?" Eugenio nodded, and Antonia took out her phone, scrolling through the photos that Valentine had sent her. "She's beautiful and looks like you," Eugenio smiled. Tears welled up in Antonia's eyes. Well, baby, don't cry. You'll get her back. You'll see, everything will work out." Strangely, she didn't expect anything good from this conversation, but now she felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that everything would be fine. It had been 2 days since Antonia returned to her hometown. She couldn't even go near the house where her daughter lived and try to catch a glimpse of her in the window or see her going for a walk with Otilia. But her vacation was over, and she needed to work. She was desperately short in money. She couldn't afford to hire a lawyer, but she hoped that she would be able to have a consultation with a lawyer for free once again. She would fill out all the documents herself. The crucial thing was knowing what to do. A message came, which didn't happen very often. It was probably from Valentine. Antonia guessed right. He wrote, "Otilia knows everything. Can you imagine? She hired a private detective, and he followed you. He took pictures of us." Antonia sighed. What could she reply? "I'm sorry. I hope she's not too angry with you." "Ha! She kicked me out of the house. I'm sitting in a bar. It's a shame you left. I really wanted to see you." Antonia didn't know how to respond to that. Otilia had no intention of believing Valentine after what he had done. No, there was no way she could believe him. Outwardly, she didn't show she suspected him in something, but she remained vigilant. She planned to keep an eye on his phone all the time. That's where she read their conversation. She couldn't believe her eyes, rereading it over and over again. So that's what they were up to. Taking everything away from her, her entire life. Otilia trembled, but there were no tears. She waited until her husband got out of the bath and calmly said, "Pack your stuff and leave." "What?" He didn't understand. "I said, pack your stuff and leave. I know everything. I read your sweet conversation. Just remember, I won't give you Angelina. But you can leave an inch on all four sides." Valentine didn't argue or try to justify himself. Silently, he packed his things and left. Well, he mumbled something, asked for forgiveness, but Otilia had no intention of listening. She already understood everything. She hardly slept that night. She became afraid. What if they really took Angelina away from her? What if the court deemed her unfit to raise her alone? As for what that woman wrote about Angelina's father, Otilia wasn't worried about it. Her lawyer and the detective had already informed her that he would be sentenced for a long time, and no one would give him custody of the child. Another unpleasant piece of news awaited her in the morning. Sergio, the jeweler, called. "Hi, Otilia. I'm sorry, but could you bring the cross so I can appraise it? Time passed, and as I understand, you still can't repay your debt. I would like to estimate the cost of the cross." The conversation was awkward, and Otilia felt that although Sergio seemed to apologize, he still didn't provide any alternative. She had to promise that she would do it. But for that, she needed to go to the bank first and retrieve it, then go to Sergio himself. Otilia didn't want to take Angelina with her, so she called her neighbor first, but she was busy. Then she dialed her mother's number. Otilia called several times, but her mother didn't pick up. Had she become that offended? Fine, so be it. Otilia herself would never be such a mother. She would never abandon Angelina without help. She had to take Angelina with her and first go to the bank, then to Sergio. It was cold and slippery, and Otilia was afraid that if she carried her daughter in her arms, she might fall along with her. So she held her hand tightly, barely stepping on the icy surface. As she was on her way to Sergio, the detective messaged her. She continued to monitor that woman, and he informed Otilia that Valentine had gone to her city at night and met with her in the morning. Suddenly, Otilia became so angry at all of them. She felt sorry for herself, for having to drag Angelina to all these places without anyone's help, for pawning the family heirloom and quarreling with her mother because of it. And it was all that woman's fault. Suddenly, Otilia made a decision. She decided to call her. She had saved her number back then. She immediately picked up the phone, and Otilia began speaking, not understanding herself, in some kind of emotional state, wanting to vent all the pain that had accumulated in her. And at some point, she got distracted, didn't watch her daughter, and she pulled her hand away and ran after some dog across the road. Everything that happened afterward felt like a dream. A car went off from the corner and the driver noticed the running girl too late, so he couldn't brake in time. Otilia screamed, dropped the phone from her hand, and ran toward her daughter. She grabbed her in her arms and couldn't comprehend anything anymore. Someone called an ambulance, and surprisingly, it arrived quickly. Angelina was unconscious. Someone tried to calm Otilia down, doctors injected something into her, and then she couldn't recall the events. She forgot about the phone, apparently leaving it lying there on the pavement. Of course, things could have been much worse. Otilia understood that when she sat in the hospital corridor, waiting for Angelina to undergo surgery. But she still couldn't forgive herself. How could she allow such a thing to happen? And what kind of mother was she after that? Thinking about it, she realized that more than anything in the world, she wanted her mother to be by her side. She started searching for her phone and remembered that she left it there when Angelina got hit by the car. She approached the woman sitting nearby and asked for permission to make a call from her phone. This time, her mother answered right away. She didn't know it was Otilia. With a trembling voice, Otilia told her that Angelina was hit by a car. Her mother, of course, began lamenting and asking a million questions. "Mom, I asked a woman for her phone to call you. I left mine somewhere out there, on the street, when everything happened. I can't talk. Can you come?" "Well, of course, dear, I'll be there soon." Otilia felt a little relieved. Her mother would come now, and everything would be fine. And she indeed arrived. She brought some food and even a phone. "Where did you get it?" Otilia asked in surprise. "Oh, I just made a call to it, that's all. No big deal." "How is Angelina?" "I don't know. I'm waiting." Her mother embraced her and said, "If it was bad, you would have known it already." They waited together afterward. And her mother was right, the surgery was successful, and although they didn't allow her to see Angelina, placing her in the intensive care unit, they definitively stated that the danger was over. Yesterday it started snowing, and then everything melted, and by morning, the roads were covered with an icy crust. Antonia was in a hurry to work. After a sleepless night, she overslept and was running late. She didn't anticipate how slippery it would be, and her boots were like ice skates. She could barely stay on her feet and, in the end, of course, she fell, twisting her ankle painfully. Strangely, it was at that moment that she remembered Valentine, how he took her to the infirmary when she was in school. It was a silly memory, to be honest. It wasn't difficult for Antonia to admit that she missed the time when they've been chatting too, and not just because he told her about Angelina. Things went extremely well with the lawyer. He said he would help her without any problems, and he also saw it as a good support. Although Eugenio wasn't the perfect father, for now, he had all the rights to Angelina, which meant she couldn't adopt her. However, Antonia felt guilty, strangely enough. She seemed to have done everything right, but while she was in prison, it was Otilia and Valentine who took care of her daughter. And now she was seemingly using Eugenio behind their backs, not saying anything to Otilia and Valentine. Deep down, Antonia knew that all of this was foolish, and she simply wanted to message Eugenio. And she did. "Hi. I think I should warn you, Angelina's father has also filed a lawsuit for custody. If not him, then his relatives have the right to claim guardianship. I'm sorry, but I couldn't not tell you this." The response came immediately. "I understand that what I'm about to say now is foolish, but for me, the perfect way out would be to have you and Angelina by my side." Antonia read the message several times and then blocked Valentine's number. What had she done? She spent the whole day in a daze. She didn't know what to do next. Everything had become too complicated. And she kept thinking about her daughter. What was happening to her now? Because of this whole situation, Otilia must be nervous, and that must affect Angelina. Antonia remembered how her daughter had difficulty falling asleep. I wonder if Otilia knows that she needs to be rocked to sleep. Antonia remembered the weight of her daughter in her arms, although it was a long time ago. Sometimes it even felt like another life. Otilia was still in pain, unable to sleep at night. She thought about her daughter, Valentine, Eugenio. How everything had become tangled. Could she regain custody of her daughter? Sometimes she felt like she could, but sometimes, like in this moment, she was overcome by weakness, and she felt like everything was lost. And in the morning, as she left the house, she ran into Valentine. It was strange and unexpected. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed in surprise. "I came to see you," he answered gloomily. "Why?" "Otilia read our messages. She ordered call records." "Well, she kicked me out." Antonia laughed. Not with malice, but bitterly. "She kicked you out, and you decided to come to me? How amusing." "That's not it," Valentine shouted. "I wrote to you, I told you that I wanted to be with you. And you blocked my number, as if I was an annoying little boy. And what did you expect? We're on opposite sides. I want to regain custody of my daughter. And you want to claim her as your own. Valentine looked at her like a beaten dog. I really don't know what to do. It's cruel to treat Otilia like this. You don't know anything. She can't have children, and Angelina is her last chance. She loves her like her own daughter. She'll die if she loses her. And what about me? Do you think I love her any less? I don't know. Antonia looked at him, and it hurt. Get out, she said softly. I won't leave until we talk. I guess we did. No. Yes. Valentine approached her and tried to embrace her, but Antonia broke free and ran away. She couldn't explain what was wrong, but she firmly knew she needed to stay away from Valentine. At noon, she went outside to take a walk and dispel her sadness. She walked along a busy avenue when her phone rang. When Antonia brought the phone to her eyes and saw who it was, she was surprised and horrified to see that it was Otilia. Since that first day, she hadn't called her. And she never thought Otilia would ever call her. She answered the call, and before she could say anything, she immediately heard Otilia's agitated and hysterical voice. And what, are you happy? You think you can take my husband first and then my child? Well, I'm telling you, you will never get Angelina. You are a monster. An ugly monster, and I don't care what you think. If you want, take Valentine, I don't need him. That weakling is good for nothing but running away. Yes, he will run away from you too. Or do you think you're special? Aside from Otilia's voice, Antonia heard the noise of cars in the background, indicating that she was also walking along a busy street. Where was Angelina now? What happened to her? Listen, Antonia began, but Otilia interrupted her. Who do you think you are to speak to me? You're a criminal, and your place is in jail. Just remember, soon you. Suddenly, screeching brakes and a desperate female scream were heard. Antonia was horrified to hear the sound of the phone hitting the pavement, someone's hurried footsteps, and Otilia's scream. A scream that made her heart stop. Antonia's pulse raced as if she had a fever. What had happened? If something happened to Angelina, she was the only one to blame, and no one else. Antonia couldn't find her footing. She called Otilia several times, but she didn't answer. Worry consumed her to the point that she got lost for a moment, forgetting where she was and forgetting that she needed to return to work. She stood in the middle of the street, lost and frightened. What should she do? How could she find out what happened? She realized that besides Valentine, she had no one else to turn to. She unblocked his number and called him. Antonia. His voice sounded joyful, and for a moment, it hurt her to think about what she was about to tell him. Otilia called me, she said hoarsely. And I think something happened. We were talking on the phone, and then... I don't know, she dropped the phone, I heard some screams, and I couldn't reach her anymore. Oh no. Where are you right now? Valentine asked. I'm outside. Near my workplace. I need to go back soon, but I'm really scared. I don't know what happened to Angelina. Valentine, what if something happened to her? It's all my fault, only mine. Calm down, Antonia. First of all, we don't know what happened there. Maybe it's nothing serious, so let's not panic prematurely. And secondly, she called you, not the other way around. Tell me where I can pick you up. I'll try to find out what happened on my way there. Antonia was not particularly comforted by his words. She couldn't stop thinking about Angelina. She just wanted to regain her daughter, wanted to correct the mistakes of the past. And now it turned out that she had only made things worse. Valentine called her back after half an hour. And from his voice, she immediately knew that things were bad. Angelina got hit by a car, he said, his voice strained. They are operating on her right now. I managed to reach her grandmother, but Otilia still isn't answering her phone. Those words simply stunned Antonia. Her daughter got hit by a car. And it happened at the very moment when they were arguing with Otilia. Her temples pounded as if with sledgehammers. Valentine was saying something, but Antonia couldn't hear him. She urgently needed to get to her daughter. Her boss was aware of her situation, but she had already allowed Antonia to go on vacation, so she wasn't thrilled about her leaving again. But she also had children of her own, and she couldn't say no. When Valentine arrived, Antonia was already waiting for him outside. "I don't care what anyone says, but I want to go to my daughter right now." Is the number of the hospital where she is? How can I find her?" she said. Valentine looked at her reproachfully. "Do you think I'm not going there? She's our daughter too. And besides, I won't leave you alone. I want to be with you always." "Valentine, please don't start." "Antonia, you can choose not to listen to me, but will it change anything?" "Fine, I'll stop. We'll talk about this later. Right now, we need to get to Angelina as quickly as possible. I checked, we can catch a train if we leave right now." They arrived early in the morning and immediately went to the hospital. Otilia still didn't answer their calls, but her mother picked up once, although it was brief and curt. From that, they could only gather that the surgery was successful and Angelina was feeling fine but still in the intensive care unit. "No one is allowed to see her at the moment," Valentine said. "Maybe you can wait somewhere, and I'll go and try to find out. Don't be upset, but it's not very desirable for you to be there." "I'm going there anyway." "What are you even talking about? She's my daughter, and I have the right to know how she is." Antonia herself understood that her presence there wouldn't be welcomed by anyone, but she didn't care. She could see that Valentine was worried, so she suggested, "We can go separately, don't worry." He agreed with relief and wanted to go first, but Antonia said she couldn't wait. So she went in first. In hindsight, she shouldn't have ignored him. She couldn't find anyone for a long time, and when she finally did, it didn't amount to much. They wouldn't let her in, they didn't give her any information. Thankfully, she didn't encounter Otilia. She went downstairs and sat in the emergency room, unsure of what to do next. And then Valentine called. "Where are you?" he asked. "I'm in the emergency room." "You were right, they didn't let me in and didn't tell me anything." "Don't worry, it's okay. Angelina has regained consciousness and her condition is stable. They are transferring her to a room. Visitors are not allowed there as it is a surgical ward. But Otilia has been placed with her, so everything is okay." Otilia was with her. But there should have been Antonia instead. It hurt Antonia deeply, and she decided that she would do everything to have Angelina back with her as soon as possible. Antonia refused to go home until she was sure Angelina was okay. Every day, she tried to gain access to the ward to see her, even though she knew Otilia was with her. She even befriended one of the nurses who unexpectedly sympathized with her and provided updates about Angelina. One day, Antonia managed to sneak into the ward and peek into the room. There were 3 beds, with children lying on each of them, a 9-year-old girl on one, a mother with a baby on another, and Otilia with Angelina on the third. Otilia was sitting on the bed, cradling Angelina in her lap. The girl's hands were wrapped around Otilia's neck, and she gently stroked her back. Antonia couldn't see Otilia's face, but she saw her daughter's face. She looked at Otilia with love. At that moment, a nurse entered the room, fortunately not noticing Antonia. She was wearing a white coat draped over her shoulders to avoid attracting attention. Upon seeing the nurse, Angelina burst into bitter tears and clung tightly to Otilia's neck, calling out loudly, "Mom." At that moment, someone, a nurse or doctor, approached from behind, but Antonia didn't get who it was. "What are you doing here?" they asked. "I'm leaving now," Antonia hurriedly reassured them. That word "mom" continued to sound in her mind, and she couldn't forget those hands that held on tightly to her mother. She walked out onto the street. The cold air couldn't chase away the sharp pain inside her. What was she doing? She wanted to deprive a child of her mother. Otilia was terrified that she might lose Angelina because of this whole situation, as she had failed to take care of her. Fortunately, Angelina was recovering quickly, and they were promised to be discharged from the hospital soon. But while they were still there, Otilia's thoughts were consumed by the upcoming legal battles. She didn't know where to find the money for all of this, and she had to give up the cross Sergio had given her, as he sympathized with her, but couldn't wait for the money due to unforeseen expenses. Otilia refused the services of a detective. She had already learned enough. And overall, things seemed to get out of hand. Thankfully, her mother had declared a temporary truce. She brought them hot meals every day in a thermos, bought books and toys for Angelina. Valentine also tried to reach out, but Otilia didn't answer his calls, and thankfully, visitors were not allowed. She would never be able to forgive him. She thought about blocking his number, but that would be another loss of control. At least this way, she knew what he thought and did. He believed he was to blame for everything, begged for forgiveness, and promised to do everything to make them and Angelina happy. Despite her anger towards him, reading those words was comforting. Her mother picked them up from the hospital. Everything was tidy at home, and Otilia's favorite gazpacho soup was on the stove. However, there was no diet soup for Angelina. "Mom, Angelina can't eat that," she exclaimed when her mother placed 3 bowls of soup on the table. "My dear, how long can we feed her this bland food?" "She wants something tasty too," her mother replied, trying her best. Otilia struggled to control herself. After all, her mother was making an effort. "Angelina has a special diet, Mom. You know that perfectly well. It's important to me, you understand? The routine and everything else. I never had that, and I want to give it to her." "What do you mean you never had that?" Her mother didn't understand. "Peace of mind. Certainty. To know what will happen today, tomorrow, and the day after," Otilia explained. Her mother became flustered. "Otilia, but I tried my best. Can you believe it? You turned out just like your grandmother. She was all about diets and order. I wanted scrambled eggs with sausage, but I got chicken soup. How I suffered standing on peas." "On peas?" Otilia couldn't believe it. She didn't remember her grandmother well, but there was something like that. For example, to get jam, she had to eat soup with onions first, and that soup always made Otilia sick. It was slimy and unpleasant. "So, you had a routine and a diet?" Otilia clarified. "I did. Just like our Angelina." Otilia had never heard anything like that from her mother. While she treated the girl well, she never referred to her as our Angelina. Otilia burst into tears. "My dear, what's wrong?" "Okay, that's enough. Calm down. Why are you crying? Do you want me to make soup for Angelina now? Please stop crying." "No, it's not about it," Otilia said through her tears. "Mom, so you're saying that when Angelina grows up, she'll complain about having had a routine? Like I complain about not having one? If, of course, she grows up with me." Tears welled up in her eyes again. "What on earth are you talking about, Otilia? Don't you know? Antonio withdrawn the lawsuit from the court. How is it? Just like that. Both her and her husband. Now you just need to adopt Angelina. But you know what? You should forgive Valentine. After all, if you won't be together, who knows what might happen." That's when Otilia understood a few things. First, it didn't matter how she raised her daughter, she would still be blamed in the end. Second, Antonia didn't love her daughter since she gave her up, and now Angelina would always be with Otilia. And third, she should forgive her husband because she might end up adopting alone. The adoption process went smoothly. Otilia didn't give up the routine, but she allowed a little more freedom into their lives with Angelina. Her mother helped her a lot by visiting more often to see her beloved daughter and granddaughter. However, things never really improved with Valentine. Deep down, Otilia couldn't forgive him. Besides, he acted as if something was wrong with him, always tired and moody. He should have been happy that she took him back. One day, Unable to contain herself, she asked, "Why are you as sour as a lemon?" "Everything is good now. Angelina is our daughter." "We have financial troubles," he replied. The situation was really like this: they no longer received any payments for Angelina, and Otilia hadn't started working yet because she didn't want to send her daughter to daycare. "Don't worry, we'll manage. If you want, I can cut down on expenses. I'll try to borrow some money from my mother. We haven't even repaid her the previous debt. We would have repaid it if it weren't for her." Otilia couldn't hold back anymore. "She caused all this circus, I lost so much money, and in the end, she cowardly ran away. That so-called mother." Valentine turned pale and said softly, "Don't talk about her like that. You don't know anything." "And what should I know? She left Angelina herself." "No, she didn't," he suddenly yelled. "She just didn't want to traumatize her, to take her away from her mother. She understood that for Angelina, you are her mother. And she imagined that her daughter would suffer, so she decided to end it all. And I'm here only because she wants Angelina to grow up in a full and loving family." "What?" Otilia couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Why are you here?" "I wouldn't have come back if it weren't for Angelina," Valentine said wearily. "I love Antonia. That was not my intention. I don't know how it happened." Otilia remained silent for a long time, then suddenly burst into laughter. "What's wrong?" Valentine asked, alarmed. "Oh, nothing. Just go back to your Antonia. Pack your things and get out of here." "Otilia, what's gotten into you?" "I said, get out." Otilia screamed. "I can't stand seeing you." Valentine stood up, held his head in his hands for a moment, and then said, "I'll send money for Angelina." Otilia covered her face with her hands. No, she wasn't in pain at all. In fact, she felt relieved that she no longer had to pretend that everything was fine. They managed quite well together. Otilia got in line for the kindergarten and started looking for job vacancies. Everything would be fine for them. And then a miracle happened. One day, someone rang her doorbell. She thought it was her mother and rushed to open it, but it wasn't her. It was her father, who had last visited her almost a year ago. "Hello, Dad," Otilia said, bewildered. "Hello, my daughter. I've brought something for Angelina. Can I come in?" "Of course, come in." Angelina was initially scared of her grandfather. She had only seen him a couple of times before. She clung to Otilia, wrapping her tiny hands around her neck. "Here, dear," her father said, handing her a simple package. Otilia took it, looked inside, and froze. It was a familiar red case. She trembled as she pulled it out and opened it. There was a cross inside. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "I changed apartments. The big one was unnecessary for an old man like me. I bought a smaller one. Here, I redeemed your cross. I also put money in a savings account for you. Your mother has it." Otilia burst into tears, and Angelina got scared and started crying too. So did the father. Angelina saw her biological mother only once. She was 7 years old when she and Otilia went to the seaside for the entire summer. One evening, as they were walking along the beach, they encountered Antonia and Valentine. Valentine was holding a little girl in his arms, and Antonia couldn't take her eyes off Angelina.